Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Dawa here. So today was my philosophy class and I went over Neoplatonic philosophy. I thought of giving you guys an idea of it as well because I already do have some of the slides with me right here. So why not, right? Why not just go over with you guys as well? So as you guys can see the screen, I'm just going to take like 5-6 minutes to briefly explain. The reason that I want you guys to watch this video is so you guys understand the influences of Neoplatonic philosophy, Plotinus, and Neoplatonism on modern Muslim paradigms, let's say. Okay, so before we start the philosophy, the way that I went about the classes, I briefed them on the metaphysics of Plato that was already we previously studied in our course, but I went through it once more, so they were able to understand the Neoplatonic philosophy a bit better. So here on the screen we have Plato's theory of the form. I honestly don't know how well you guys will be able to understand this philosophy particularly without if you guys not able to understand this guy. So Plato's theory of form is basically that there is a good, okay, the ultimate good, that is the highest form. So, and then at the bottom of existence basically are the particulars, which is the physical world. So the physical world is basically the instantiation of the forms or the world of forms. So we have the good, which is the highest form. Then we have a higher form, which are the concepts or the ideas, okay, such as justice and beauty, okay, and perfections, basically. Then we have the lower forms, which are the particular ideas of particular, let's say, particular instantiated things in the physical world. So in this case, it would be the horses on the diagram. Like there are the three horses. I don't know why there's this princess from Disney World. I just found this image on Google. So we have these three horses. So these three horses basically are less ontological or less in ontological value than the lower form, which is the horse. So think of it like this. There is a horseness. Okay. There is a horseness. Okay. There is a horseness that is the lower form, and each horse participates in the horseness. So the perfect horse, let's say, is the lower form. Okay. And then similarly, this idea, this lower form participates in the higher form, like if the particulars participates in the lower form, the lower forms participate in the higher forms, and the higher form is basically a emanation, you can say, from the good. Think of it like this. The forms or the world of forms are like the blueprints, and the particulars are like the buildings that are made from the blueprints. Okay, this is a very bad analogy, but for a basic student, this is enough for them to understand where this philosophy is going. Plato did have arguments for this. They were good arguments, I would say, very good arguments for the world of forms or ideal forms. It is very distinct to what we normally studied. Our paradigm of the modern age is very materialistic. It is not idealistic as of Plato. So if you guys do understand this, good. Then we went on to who Botanus is. Botanus lived around the time period of 205 to 270 AC. He was agnostic. Okay, so basically he was, in a very fundamental sense, without going too in depth, he was a guy who believed in spiritual practice or rituals that would uh, connect him or join him back with the universal intellect, or gaining knowledge by these practices, and the practices that would make him attain a higher, let's say, state of existence. Some these kind of ideas are what Gnostic normally hold on to. Then we have he was a idealistic monist. Okay, I misspelled that. It's Monist. I wrote Monist. That's a typo. Idealistic monist. Plato was a ideal. Plotinus was an idealistic monist. It means that he was an idealist. Idealist is basically like the idea of Plato. There is an ideal world, or the ideal world, or the world of forms, or the world of blueprints, or whatever. So he held on to that, and he was a monist, meaning that he held that there was a fundamental substance to all reality. There was basically a fundamental reality. Uh, and then he had the idea of emanation. He had the emanation theory, and he believed that evil is lack of reality. Uh, think of it like evil is the least of ontological things. So evil is just lack of the good. Ideas like that. Similar to think of how we studied Aristotle. I mean, I taught Aristotle's metaphysics in my course. In that, we studied that he had the idea of potentiality and actuality. And potentiality, the most potential thing is nothing. Okay, something that is completely potential is nothing, and something that is completely actual is basically the God figure in his metaphysics. So here, the God figure would be the good, and evil would be the least real, or the least in ontological value. The less ontological you get, the more evil you become, or you are. Okay, so his cosmology had a huge influence that is alive till this day, be it Christianity, Sufism, Shia Islam, different strands within Christianity itself, each having their own share of influence. Some had more influence, some had less influence. Some outright copy and pasted a lot of it. Some took some, left some took very less, but they still have influence. Some even went or fought against, or were against, the people who were completely Platonic, while themselves having been influenced by Plato's Plotinus's philosophy. So then we have, what was his philosophy? We have the one, okay, which is the top of existence. It is indivisible, undefined, completely transcendent. The one is ineffable, or basically you cannot describe him. Okay, he's undefinable in the human words, because the way that they would argue is that human words are language is made up of by our experiences, and God transcends these experiences, and so on and so forth. So they would say that God transcends these notions. So via negativa, or negative theology. So they would say God is not shape, God is not body, God is not uh, seeing, God is not hearing. God does not possess these things. God is you, because if I say hearing, he's like hearing among other things that hear. If he's seeing, then he's like among things that see. So the one is so transcendent, he can not be described by human language. So think of it like this. They're not saying that the one is like non-existent, even though they use the terminology of non-existence, but they won't say he's non-existence in the complete sense. Because that's obviously absurd. They use a definition of non-existence, but then the complete U-turn and the absurdity is that they would say that God not exists, okay, or does not exist, okay. So they would even say that God does not exist and not exist. So it's complete double negation and single negation both at the same time, which is absurd. Uh, then the intellect, um, or the nous, the mind, is seen as the thinking of the one, or the thoughts of the one. This is where Plato's ideal world fits in. Human's mind is said to be from here. So basically, the law of logic is said to be from the intellect. Uh, okay, why? I'll get into why they make this argument. Then we have the world soul, or the universal soul, which is where the Platonic demiurge fits in. Okay, it is the cause constructor of the material world, which is the bottom, with the matter and individual souls. This is basically the cause of this is the world soul or the universal soul. So what are their arguments? The contingency argument of Ibn Sina is very much arguing for the one in this scenario. He would say that everything is contingent, dependent, or let's say, uh, غير- I'm trying to use a better word. Okay, it's contingent, mm, dependent, and uh, non-absolute reality. Okay, so it is a dependent kind of reality. Okay, its existence is reality, is contingent on another. So for in this case, the argument that kind of we can use, I mean, they would use is that God is dependent, humans are dependent on X is dependent on Y is dependent on Z, so on and so forth. Hence, the set of dependent things the set of dependent thing is also dependent on that which is completely independent. And then they would try to understand what this independent being could be. And they would argue that this independent being, or wajibul wajud, or wajud al-mutlaq, unconditioned reality. Okay, so they would argue that everything is contingent. There has to be an unconditioned reality. They would say that this unconditioned existence is the one, and this one is without attributes or without parts. So they would say that even if he has real distinct attributes, then he would be his essence, or he would be a composite of essence and attributes, or they would argue with something like that. Then they would say that if he's basically this is a composite, he's made of parts, and if something is made of parts, it is dependent for its existence. They would basically, they're saying here is that, for example, uh, a human, he is a rational animal. So if a human exists, he's dependent, for a human's existence is dependent on him being rational and him being an animal. So the existence of a human is dependent on the composite of humanness, animalness, and intellect or rationality. So a human is a composite, hence dependent on both animalness and intellect. So they would say, hence, a human is dependent on these two. Similarly, they would say if God has distinct attributes, he's a composite of these attributes, and he becomes dependent on these attributes. So they would argue with something like this. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimullah, he basically says that this is not how parts work. We do negate parts for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but attributes are not parts. They are not something such as parts. They do not necessitate or imply dependency. This is how, easy. I would say it's a rather easy refutation, because we just negate their metaphysics. We just don't affirm the metaphysics. We don't say it is necessary metaphysics based on fundamental laws of logic. Then they would argue for the universal intellect by saying that we have laws of logic, or we have fundamental facts of realities that we know, such as the law of non-contradiction, the law of identity. They both are completely true, and these things, if they're completely true, and but they are multiplicity, meaning that there are two distinct laws of logic. So they are completely true, and they're distinct. Humans are fallible, imperfect beings. So these laws of logic cannot be from humans. So they have to be from something that is transcendent, which would be the universal intellect in this case. So they would say that this laws of logic are from the universal intellect, not the one, because the laws of logic are multiplicable. They are multiple. They are divided. So they cannot be from the one, because the one is indivisible. So they have to be from the intellect. So that this is how they argue that the human mind is, in a sense, from the intellect. Okay. A lot of people will say, wow, these are good arguments, but we just show that the metaphysics does not apply necessity, and their implications that they're making are not necessary. Similarly, they would argue for the world of souls, and so on and so forth. So these were the arguments that they give, but what is the philosophy that they hold on to? What are the today's influence? The thing is that this is exactly what Christianity and Ismaili Shias hold on to. In my today's class that I did it in way more in depth. I'm going very fast today, but this is where I showed that. By the way, the left slide is from Khalid Nani, who is a Ismaili Shia. So I'm being completely honest here. The right picture is showing the concept of Trinity and how this Neoplatonic philosophy is kind of going in it. Okay, the kind of it, even in the Trinity, these kinds of implications go into. Okay, not all necessarily Christians would hold on to something like on the right, but still. So these are two different religions that are influenced by the idea of Plotinus. As you can see on the bottom left, okay, this is exactly what I just showed you on the previous slide. Exactly, the God, the absolute, simple, unconditioned reality. Then the common word, in that case, Neoplatonists would call these like emanations, or the thinking of God. Then we have the universal intellect, which is eternal necessary truths and forms. Here we go. Then the universal soul, creative agent, very basically the demiurge, and the prime matter, then the individual soul. Exactly. This is Platonic. Shia Ismaili Shias do completely agree that this is Platonic, Neoplatonic. They would say that this is basically an argument for rationality, and we can affirm things from the rational and then interpret religion from rationality. This is why they're considered heretics. And then we have the Christianity, who do the similar things. By the way, fun fact, the idea of good and evil being dual, meaning lack of good, increase in evil, lack in evil, increase in good. This kind of dualism is very similar, and it does seem like an influence from Persian philosophy that precedes both these ideologies. Okay, the Christian idea of Neoplatonism and these ideas of Neoplatonism. So yeah, with that, I would like to end this class at least. It's crazy how religions come about and these ideas can spew. So what I want to really get the point across is that these ideas, these philosophies have affected religions, and it is our duty to look at these ideas and say, wait, these things are not necessarily known by religion. These things are not even necessarily known by intellect. This is a biased metaphysics, biased philosophy, and biased method of interpretation of the Holy Scriptures. Okay, basically Christianity and Ismaili Shiism, even 12 Shiism does this. So we need to protect ourselves from this influence. And this influence has spewed into a lot of Sufi thought, and this influence, let's say, has gone down, but some of the remnants still stays in a lot of Muslim thought, such as influences of the idea of directionality, the understanding of what directionality implies is very much based on, let's say, Greek philosophical methodology of definitions and implications, let's say. Okay, which, by the way, if you went purely on rationality, it doesn't imply as such. With that, let's answer today's video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.